Welcome to The Facts. I'm your host, Craig Dewey, and on the program this week, we have Casey Wilson, one of the co-founders of South Dakota Shared Parenting, to discuss the issue and what is going on in the South Dakota legislature regarding Senate Bill 74, which is a bill dealing with shared parenting here during the 2014 legislative session. Casey, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Craig.
And before we get into the details of the legislature this year, could you tell us a little bit about what shared parenting is?
Shared parenting is an agreement between parents post-separation or divorce where they agree to share parental duties, both decision-making as well as time-sharing. It's not always equal time-sharing. It can be 40% time-sharing to one parent, 60% to the other, whatever works best for that particular family. And that's been proven in research to be best for kids and parents.
And your organization, South Dakota Shared Parenting, as one of the co-founders, could you talk a little bit more about the story about how it came together and what you do?
South Dakota Shared Parenting is it's evolved from a couple of other groups. One is the Coalition for South Dakota Shared Parenting, which is probably 10 to 12 years old. It kind of fizzled out because of lack of organization. And a lot of times these parents just lose hope and lose heart, and then new blood comes in that goes through the system and finds out how unfair things are. And about 3 years ago, I got divorced and saw the unfairness in the system. And I reached out to a couple of the founders, the people that were involved in the former group, and I started a shared parenting group that has turned into 3,500 members between two of them. One is essentially a fan page for just people that support shared parenting, and one is for people that would like to get more involved, not only in gaining support for their own personal cases, but in changing the laws within our state.
And then I guess talking a little bit about what prompted you to become involved, what's going on now at the legislature this year?
Well, we have a bill that we've submitted that is a compromise between the State Bar Association, and the State Bar Association has been the main opponent to shared parenting in South Dakota for the past 15 years. And we came together and came up with a bill that we think would help things, at least. It may not solve all the problems, but it is a step in the right direction.
And the State Bar represents attorneys across the state?
Yes, sir.
And why do you view this bill this year as significant, particularly in light of some of the recent legislative history?
Well, like I said, it's gonna at least give judges a set of guidelines to follow to award joint physical custody. Previously in our codified law, we have little, if any, mention of joint physical custody, which is the legal term for shared parenting. So sometimes judges don't even know they can award it because there's not a lot of mention in it within our law right now. And this law doesn't necessarily give a presumption of shared parenting, but it gives judges a set of guidelines to follow to find out if a shared parenting arrangement would work for this couple that is divorcing or separating or whatever it may be for the kids.
As far as the current bill, Senate Bill 74, could you walk through some of the specifics that are included this year?
Sure. Well, in initial filing, or when a judge is determining custody, it first asks if either party has been abusive or anything, has a history of domestic violence or been convicted of domestic violence. And there's a rebuttable presumption that they shall not be awarded joint physical custody. And then it goes through a set of factors. There's 14 of them in whether this couple is good candidates for shared parenting. One is whether one parent has alienated the other one. One parent can't communicate effectively maybe with the other parent. Whether one has a sex abuser, a person that has been convicted of sexual abuse around the kids. geographic proximity, if parents live close to one another. And these are just factors that judges will weigh on when they decide whether joint physical custody is in the best interest.
And so when you talk about that rebuttable presumption, for people who aren't familiar with that legal term, what does that mean as far as protecting children?
Well, a presumption is, okay, so if you were divorcing, a presumption just sets up a starting point to where, you know, when you're divorcing, it should be presumed that 50-50 custody is awarded to both parents. Now, the rebuttable word means that one parent can ask that not be granted because for any number of reasons, abuse, neglect, whatever it may be. You know, there's any number of things that could work against a parent in gaining custody.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, then if there's a rebuttable presumption in some of these safeguards, if abuse exists in a relationship, that would be a safeguard to protect kids so that kids wouldn't be put in a dangerous situation.
Precisely.
And then where's the bill at in the legislative process right now?
It has reached no opposition right now. This week it was voted on in Senate Judiciary, passed that unanimously. The next day it went through the full Senate, passed that unanimously. So we got the ball rolling pretty good.
And so you mentioned earlier here in the segment that the state bar, which represents attorneys, has been opposed to the legislation in the past. And some of the arguments as to why they've been opposed is because they say it puts children in harmful situations and it elevates the rights of the parents over the rights of the children. How do you respond to that?
I think nothing could be further from the truth. Actually, the research shows that when you have a shared parenting arrangement, the conflict actually goes down over time. A lot of times these rulings from these judges are being made at the absolute worst time in a couple's history that they will ever get along, right at the divorce. They will never get along any worse than at that point in time. And they are basing a decision on how they will get along in the future at that point in time under the current situation. And what happens a lot of time is this current arrangement where one parent needs to win the custody of the children and one parent losing. We all love our kids and would do anything to fight for time with them. And when you stand the chance of losing pretty much 90% of the time with your kids, it causes you to fight for them. So essentially what's happening in the current situation is the kids are used as a pawn to try to increase billable hours for attorneys, essentially, because going to court makes them a lot of money.
Well, thanks for that run. And Casey, as far as this issue, I mean, whether it be people or someone they know or a family member, child custody hearings and proceedings are everyone knows someone who's been through that process. So in your opinion, I mean, why is this legislation needed and what happens in the current court system when that custody hearing starts?
Currently right now we have our situation is based on the best interest of the child, as it should be. The best interest of the child is kind of a misleading term though. Our current laws on best interests of the child are based on a piece of case law called Furstenberg and Furstenberg, and it lays out a set of factors. It should be pointed out though that Furstenberg and Furstenberg is a case where one parent lived in Sioux Falls, the other parent lived in Minnesota. So a shared parenting arrangement could not work. But all cases in South Dakota are based on these factors set forth in Furstenberg and Furstenberg, which doesn't allow for a shared parenting arrangement. It is based on stability of both parents, which can be a relative term. One judge may assume stability is this, another stability is this. You have to have a primary caretaker and harmful parental misconduct. There's 5 factors, I believe, but the main thing is that this case decides all other cases, and a shared parenting arrangement could not work in the Furstenberg factors. within Fürstenberg and Fürstenberg. So we're deciding all cases in South Dakota based on this one case. So our legislature has not set down a set of guidelines in awarding custody, and they need to. Right now, what happens is a lot of times is false domestic violence and false child abuse cases are run rampant in our courts. One parent, if say one parent files for divorce, both parents are living in the same home, a lot of times one parent will file false domestic violence or protection orders against the other parent to get them out of the house and gain temporary custody of the kids. And I talk to women all the time in my group that say that their attorney had tried to get them to do a false protection order, and some have done it. And there is nothing that will harm a co-parenting relationship or a relationship with a parent and child than false allegations. And the accuser gets off scot-free. They gain temporary custody of the kids. The other parent is edged out of the home, oftentimes can't see the kids until there's a hearing for this protection order.
And so does the shared parenting concept favor one gender over the other?
No. We believe we're not for mother's rights or father's rights. We are for both parents' rights to have a seat at the table to raise their kids, not only have the decision-making abilities, but, substantial time with both parents. So, a lot of times 85%, the statistics nationwide say that fathers are the non-custodial parent, which would make mothers 15%, but there's a lot of mothers nowadays being the non-custodial parent just because of the adversarial nature of the system. One parent's got to be chosen the winner, one parent's got to be chosen the loser. In shared parenting, both parents can win, and when both parents win, the kids win, because the conflict goes way down, and that's the number one predictor in adverse child outcomes is the level of conflict. And when you have a sole custody arrangement, which is what we advocate for here in South Dakota, conflict is high, and the attorneys feed off that.
Is there any research that shows that conflict is reduced over the long term?
Yes, Bauserman in 2002, there's been several studies, and I believe it's Melly and Brown, found that interparental conflict goes up in sole custody arrangements and goes down in joint physical custody arrangements. So yeah, there's a lot of research out there. There's 20 years worth of research shows that shared parenting is best for kids and families. And actually the divorce rates go down in states that have high joint physical custody rates. That's something that is pretty astounding too.
So if I heard you correctly, then it sounds like there's not only short-term research that's been done, but also longitudinal research that really looks over a number of years as well.
Yep. They've been doing research on shared parenting for 20 or 30 years now. And it's fair to say that a lot of our laws were written in the 60s and 70s, and our society's changed now. In the 60s and 70s, a lot of the dads stayed home, or dads worked and provided financially for the kids, and mothers stayed home as the caretakers. There's most families now, both parents are working and both parents are involved in raising the kids. So actually the laws that are changing now are just a response to the society changing, and in other parts of the country, shared parenting is the norm. South Dakota is one of the last that really is making a push for shared parenting.
Just building off of that then, how many other states have some form of shared parenting on the books already in the U.S.?
Well, it's constantly evolving, but the last statistic I read was like 42 states have not necessarily a presumption of shared parenting, but lean in favor of shared parenting. And South Dakota was named by the National Parents Organization last year as being the worst state in the union.
And one of the arguments that's been used in the past, as well as by some opponents of shared parenting now, is that if children are being shuffled back and forth between home of mom and home of dad, that it creates something called a suitcase kid in opponents' terms, that the children really lack a home base on which to operate from, and so they can never really feel settled or have some of that predictability, which is beneficial for kids. How do you respond to that argument?
Well, in a true shared parenting arrangement, the kids will go back and forth, but they don't have suitcases. Right now, in our current South Dakota guidelines, it says the kids will bring a suitcase with clothes to and from their parents, the non-custodial parent's house. And in a shared parenting arrangement, both parents have their own clothing, both parents have everything the child needs within that home. So I would say probably our current arrangement advocates for a more suitcase kid type of arrangement than a shared parenting arrangement. And most of the research doesn't support a home base for kids. It says kids can adapt to about anything as long as they know what's coming.
Well, thanks for that breakdown, Casey. And when we return back after the break, we'll continue to discuss the shared parenting issue, more arguments for and against the bill, and also get an update on where the bill is at and where things are going moving ahead. Stick around. And Casey, if we look at some opinions of other professionals, let's take the behavioral health field. As psychologists, psychiatrists, and other family therapists, what are their thoughts on this issue?
Well, the thing is with psychologists and people in the mental health field, all of their practices are based on research. So, and all of the research points towards shared parenting. So, of course, those folks are in favor of shared parenting as a general rule. The problem is our courts are not based on research. They're based on bias and the law of what has happened in the past. So our courts really need to start basing their decisions on research and not on, what has happened in the past and law and a piece of case law that was written in the 80s. So the behavioral health is as a general rule in favor of shared parenting involving both parents and kids' lives as much as possible.
And some other individuals have argued that, let's take the example of a situation people have heard about in the news over a few years ago. They would say that shared parenting could put the child in a situation where Charlie Sheen, when he was on his drug-fueled meltdown, that kids could be put in custody of a parent like that who would not be fit to be a parent.
Well, that can already happen in our current situation. It happens all the time. People right now are given custody oftentimes due to gender, or if they're willing to do whatever it takes to gain custody. And some of these abusive parents are already gaining custody. But in this bill, there are actually safeguards put in if a person has a history of any type of abuse, even substance abuse, that it shouldn't be in the best interest of the child that they have their children, in a substantial amount of time anyway.
So this bill, what you're saying is it really centers around parents who are fit, and once they're judged to be fit, then that discussion can happen about how much time would be shared or split.
Exactly, and that's all our group advocates for, is equal rights for fit parents. Not any parents, but fit parents.
Is there a specific example or two that you use to help make the case as far as why you think shared parenting should be supportive?
I've talked to hundreds of non-custodial parents, and the stories are horrible. One of my friends, who I've known for 20 or 25 years, and he's in his 50s now, he came and testified, and I knew he'd been divorced when I was in high school, and he hasn't seen his daughters in 7 years right now, because one parent is given the full control of the kids, and the other parent only gets to see the kids if that parent feels like they can. And a lot of times in divorce situations, people's feelings are hurt so bad, and they will do anything to get at the other parent. And sometimes the kids are used as pawns against that parent. And that's the really terrible thing. It's called parental alienation, where the kids are turned against or used against the other parent. And it's extremely damaging to kids.
Have you heard from kids or looked at research from children who are now adults that look back on their child custody situation growing up to provide their thoughts on looking back what they would have seen as the best interest?
Arizona did research on, they did a study of 800 kids. And 1/3 of them had custody with their mother, 1/3 of them came from intact families, and 1/3 of them had a shared parenting arrangement. The kids that were from shared parenting arrangement had the best outcomes when compared to the kids in sole physical custody arrangements, which were with their mothers. And nearly all of them thought both parents splitting time with them was best. So the kids are the ones that we're looking at mostly, and they're the ones that are the most in favor of it if they're able to know what it is. You have to realize that a lot of kids raised in sole custody arrangements have no idea what shared parenting is. So the kids that were raised in it have the best outcomes than when compared to, sole physical custody arrangements, which is what we have as a standard in South Dakota.
And then in wrapping up this discussion about the arguments for and against, could someone make an argument that if Senate Bill 74 had passed, that it could actually make shared parenting more difficult?
It might not necessarily make it more difficult, but if you're a fit parent, it should make it easier. If you're an unfit parent, you have a pretty high hurdle to jump. So, and that's our main goal, is to try to make sure that fit parents can have as great a shot possible at raising their kids.
And so if we look at the legislative process here, the bill is passed the Senate and is headed over to the House. Could you just talk a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, so it'll go to House Committee now, and it will be voted on by the Judiciary Committee, I believe. And once it passes that, it'll need to go all the way through the House and then be signed by the governor if it doesn't have any amendments on it, which it shouldn't.
And so in the coming days and weeks then, if viewers wanted to find out more about the legislation or get involved in the process somehow, what do you recommend they do?
They can visit our Facebook page at Supporters of South Dakota Shared Parenting. That's the fan page. Or they can join our group page, which is South Dakota Shared Parenting, and they can contact their legislators. I urge people to contact their legislators. You can find that on the website, the legislative website, and contact them that way.
Well, Casey, we really appreciate you coming on the show and giving us a rundown on the issue and some of the arguments for and against.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for covering shared parenting.
You're welcome. And we're also interested in your feedback and comments here at The Facts. Please send your emails to feedback@centralplainsnews.com. And be sure to tune in next week because we'll be back with more of The Facts.